My name is John Seidel. I'm the director of the Sauce Southeast Asia Center here at the London School of Economics and Political Science, the LSE. The center is delighted to welcome you to today's event and to welcome our speaker, Dr. Jordana Ramalho from University College London, UCL, who'll be talking about her research on informality in a Singapore-like Cebu, paradoxes and contestations in world-class city making. A few housekeeping points about today's seminar or webinar. It is recorded, I believe, so let's all behave accordingly. For those of you joining us online, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. You can put your question in the Q&A function. Please give us not only your name, but your affiliation, location, and then your question. If you'd like to post about today's event on social media, please be sure to tag us at LSE SEAC. We're on LinkedIn and Instagram, and we're also on YouTube, where you can find this and other future recorded events. I should mention that we have a few more events at this late stage of the teaching term, and then when we return in May for the spring term. Next week in this slot on Wednesday, March 25th, we have Dr. Janjira Sumbatpunsari from Chulalongkorn University in Bangkok talking about death by 1,000 cuts, digital repression and democracy in Thailand. And then the following Wednesday, April 1st, April Fool's Day, although I think in this country that sort of stops at noon, right? You're not allowed to do silly things after 12 noon. We have Dr. Tarapi Tan, who's from Northern Illinois University, but who's a visiting fellow at the center. And she'll be talking about socialist meaning making through rice and the 1967 rice riots in Burma or Myanmar. I should also mention, for those of you who have sort of urban interests and who are geographers, we will be having a full day workshop on flooding, not just urban, but urban and rural flooding across Southeast Asia on Wednesday, May 20th, our annual Southeast Asia Forum, and we'll be covering the Philippines, Indonesia, we'll be covering Thailand and Vietnam as well. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Jordana Ramalho. She's an associate professor in development planning for diversity and the co-director of the MSc in urban development planning at the Bartlett Development Planning Unit at UCL. Her work spans the fields of urban geography, development studies, and feminist urban political ecology, exploring the social spatial trajectories of urban development, with a particular focus on disaster risk governance, resilience building, urban regeneration, and the intersectional dynamics of dispossession, displacement, and collective action. She's currently leading a 3-year UK Research Institute-funded research project, Listen, Learn, and Leap, which explores the potential for nature-based solutions to advance equitable and sustainable forms of climate resilience in East African cities. But her heart is still in Cebu, and that's what we're going to hear about today.
Yeah,
right. Many thanks.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for being here today and for joining us online. Yeah, I'm really delighted to be here, to be back at the LSE, which is where, yeah, I've been grown as an academic, a researcher, and kind of an action researcher, because this is where I did my master's and my PhD in the geography department here. So thank you for inviting me back. Yeah, to share some evolving reflections, I would say, on a topic that a broad topic that I've been exploring for over 12 years. It started in my PhD. And this, broadly speaking, concerns, the way I've packaged it is it's concerning the kind of governance and treatment of informality in Metro Cebu. So as I mentioned briefly, like my kind of entry into this topic started in my PhD, where I was working in Metro Cebu exploring disaster risk management and resilience building, and particularly looking at the impacts of these kind of governance approaches to people living in informal settlements that were classed as danger zones. And so I was really trying to understand the implications of disaster risk governance in informal settlements that were danger zones, and looking at gendered participation and experiences within these community-based spaces. So that work is kind of ongoing. I'm really plugged in and still connected with the associations and the NGOs that I've been working with through my PhD. But more recently, sort of post-pandemic, when I went back to the Philippines, I started, I'm going to tell you about what I saw when I was there, but I started kind of expanding my research beyond the informal settlement to think about the ways in which similar logics and technologies of governance, as I call them, are impacting informal economic spaces and actors within the city. And in particular, and the story I'm going to share with you today, it relates to what I see as like highly contentious efforts to modernize, or as many, including myself, would argue, to privatize carbon market, which is the oldest and largest public market in the city, and possibly the oldest and largest in the Visayan region generally. So this is the story that I'm going to share with you today. All right, it's you'll see this is kind of ongoing work. It's not like a fully refined piece, but it's a really interesting story that I want to share. And I do think it has something important to kind of reveal or to highlight about the current and future political economies and trajectories of urban transformation in the Philippines more generally. So just, briefly speaking about some of the arguments or the landscapes that I want to take us through. I think the case of Carbon really draws attention to the paradoxical logics and practices of informality and kind of planning, counter-planning, how all of that kind of interacts with one another that are enmeshed in the pursuits of a world-class city. And also the kind of alternative socio-spatial imaginaries that come from these tensions and these spaces. And that's what I want to give space to, and we can chat about, when I finish the presentation. So just briefly to say that I have been doing research in the Philippines since 2014, but this particular story and the findings I'm going to share relate to research that I conducted in 2023 and consisted of focus group discussions, 17 in-depth interviews with market vendors in particular, both male and female market vendors, but also with city councillors, the market authority, the vice mayor, attendance at a public hearing connected with the carbon market redevelopment. I attended a waterfront development summit, which is all implicated in this story, and happened to be in the city for a number of these kind of market-related groundbreaking events. So, and I go back every year. So as I said, this is a live story. I'm building on it as I go through desk-based research and ongoing conversations with people. That's where these findings come from. All right. Right. So just to briefly locate us in the Philippines, for those of you who aren't familiar with the city, Metro Cebu is the second largest city in the Philippines after Metro Manila. So it's located in the central Visayas. It has a population of just under 3 million people, and the metro area is made up of 13 different cities and or municipalities. And so our story today is in the largest, which is Cebu City, but you'll hear me use terms Metro Cebu and Cebu City interchangeably over the context of our conversation. Now, for as long as I've been working in Cebu, the city's urban development interventions and kind of planning, I guess you could say, have, in my opinion, really been driven and very much underpinned by ideas and narratives that are linked to the global city and aspirations of becoming a global city. These worlding aspirations, as I've termed them, are evident in a number of different kind of big infrastructure and foreign investment projects that have been surfacing in the wider metropolitan area, probably since like the 1980s, possibly before, but very much like became a visible part of the urban fabric in the 1980s, following or as like part of rampant neoliberal restructuring that was taking place towards the end of and certainly in the post-Marcos era. And maybe one of the first examples of these worlding projects would be the Mactan Export Processing Zone. Some of you might have heard of that. It opened in 1979. This was like a big project. It still exists. It's actually expanded, but it was like just established to kind of bring in foreign investment and help grow the economy through this foreign investment. Another example of this kind of worlding projects taking place in the city, I would say the development of IT Park, which came about in the early 2000s on the back of the so-called Cebu period, which again was a very investment-oriented development of the 1990s. It's pictured here. It's very much, I'm going to be speaking about a Singapore-like Cebu, and for me, before that term even came to fruition. Like for me, this kind of enclave of high-rise buildings, luxury apartments, condominiums, restaurants. It's also the hub of like business process outsourcing. For me, like it really stands out in comparison to other parts of Cebu City and Metro Cebu more generally, and speaks to this kind of Singapore-like imagery and space. Worlding aspirations are also being elicited through real estate projects. And so here, this is a photo I took of a billboard advertising a gated community that claims to contribute to the transformation of Cebu into a world-class lifestyle destination. And also, you know, we've got more recent commercial development projects. So this is SM Seaside. This is a super mall that opened in 2015, and it's among the largest in the world. So again, this like it's not just about being a big mall, but it's one of the biggest in the world. So it's got these acclaims that establish it on the global agenda, so to speak. However, as depicted in this photograph here, and this is taken from one of the neighborhoods that I was working in during my PhD and continue to be closely connected to. It's across the street from SM Seaside, and here I think you can see, if we compare the kind of imagery of the previous watercolor with this one, these kinds of urban imaginaries, shall we call them, are very often at odds with realities of poverty, of inequality, and like projections of informality linked to poverty and inequality that very much prevail in the city. And this like dualism, I guess you could say, of the formal, informal, these tensions that exist are something that I could see very early on when I started doing research in Cebu. It was really kind of central to the imaginary that was driving formal like planning documents or like kind of urban development imaginaries. And so this is an image that was taken from a 2010 brochure promoting the Mega Cebu development project. This is essentially a mega urbanization plan that was spearheaded by prominent business owners. And it very much endorsed a neoliberal market-oriented approach to urban development through big infrastructure projects and like also through like public-private partnerships, be that through foreign capital or in many cases local capital. And the idea very explicitly was to encourage future investment in the city and to harness the city's full potential as a global economic hub. And in this photo, you can really clearly see that low-income informal neighborhoods are very much being kind of presented as emblematic of that which needs to be fixed or eradicated. And if we are going to like progress, right, if we're going to move towards being more modern, smart, inclusive, sustainable, and resilient city. And these oppositional framings, you know, are further reproduced here. This is another part of the same brochure. But again, here you see it's not just the informal settlements, but you see multiple ways in which these kinds of desired futures are pitched against this dystopic reality that I would say is very much located, even if not explicitly, in a contention or a blaming of the informal, and I use that term very loosely, right? So, for example, you know, three down, the top two are of obviously informal settlements and informal households located in riparian areas, blamed for flooding, blamed for waste. The third picture is the traffic. Now, Cebu doesn't have as bad of traffic as Manila, but it's getting worse, and it's not the infrastructure, it's not the absence of planning and roads that's being kind of blamed for that, but it's the jeepney drivers, the public utility vehicles that are often blamed for the congestion and the traffic, right? So the city kind of proposes, and I use the term the city and the state loosely. I can unpack that more critically when we have questions and answers, but one of the ways in which the city and like relevant stakeholders seek to address the seeming kind of chaos and disorder depicted in the previous images is through a proposed like reorganization and sort of rezoning, an urban cluster system based around kind of the creation of zones and or enforcement of land use and zoning regulations, right? I think it's important to bear in mind the kind of histories of planning and of urban formation, not just in Cebu or in the Philippines, but in so many different parts of the world, right? Where the city has emerged very organically, and areas are not necessarily kind of emerging from formal plans, but the plans are made retrospectively, right? And so this is from a 2015 roadmap study. I should also just mention, for interest, in case it's of interest to you, that kind of a key other international actor really involved in the thinking of and the kind of information and the development of a lot of these projects around future imaginaries of the city is JICA, the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, which is interesting in itself, right? So just hold this. I'm giving you this as a bit of context just to understand the kind of evolving nature, some of the narratives, some of the discourses that I was observing in relation to disaster risk management and resilience building in 2014, which I think tie in nicely. It's a continuing thread that features very much in the case that I'm going to share with you today. So moving on then. So this like socio-spatial reorganization of the city. And there's a number of ways in which that's happening. In my PhD, I was tracing the ways in which that is emerging through like the displacement and like basically forced evictions and demolitions of informal settlements located in riparian areas. But you see this like quite big ramping up of this socio-spatial reorganization on the grounds and legitimized through the narratives that I've just shared, following the election of Mayor, or the re-election, I should say, of Mayor Mike Rama in June 2022. Re-election, so he wasn't serving in 2021, but he's been kind of in and out of the picture of Cebuano local politics for some time. But in 2022, on the back of winning the election, in his inaugural speech, he declared a vision to create a Singapore-like Cebu, okay? Very explicitly, and he speaks about what that is, and that's kind of the guiding mantra that's going to guide his term in office. And I think a project that in many ways has become emblematic of this kind of modernizing or modernist globalizing agenda is the contentious redevelopment of carbon public market. Okay, so Carbon. So these photos I took. The majority of them, actually, I took. Certainly the top two I took in, I think, like 2013 when I first went to Cebu. Carbon, as I mentioned in my introduction, is the oldest and largest public market in the Central Visayas. There's evidence that it was in operation as a key commercial trading port predating Spanish colonization in the 1500s. Okay. The name Carbon is attributed to the coal depot that was established in the early 1900s. You can see those coal towers. There's still those visible here, the Beco towers. Yeah, and I think like, I don't know, Carbon, it's a really important trading hub. It's just its location in the Philippines. I showed you the map before, like it's right in the middle of the Philippines, an archipelago of over 7,000 islands. So anything that's coming from the south or even from Indonesia, heading up to Manila, it's going to pass through, probably going to pass through Cebu. Okay, so it's a really important port. It offers everything. Like you can find like fresh meat, seafood, spices. It's both local and imported, fruits and vegetables, flowers, handicrafts. It's a really buzzing economic hub. Yeah, my understanding is, and so take these figures with a grain of salt, but broadly speaking, prior to some of the changes that I'm going to speak to you about, as far as I understand it, there were sort of fixed stalls, ranging anywhere from around 1,800 to 2,000 stalls, and over 4,000 ambulant vendors. And by ambulant vendors, I mean not just people who are like kind of walking the streets. These are the most ambulant and also the most marginalized of vendors that operate within the city on a kind of piecemeal basis, selling seashells or selling things that they've been able to trade in order to be able to eat and get some rice, for example. But by ambulant vendors, I'm also speaking about those that have like kind of temporary stalls or mobile stalls, okay? So the area, yes, it's a vibrant economic hub, really important for servicing both formal and informal kind of spaces, actors, restaurants, okay? So I think I'm giving the picture there. But I also want to mention that the area it was for a really long time, and in many ways still today, it's quite highly stigmatized. When I first went, I love a market. You'll feel the passion for me. I love a market. And so when I first went to Cebu, public market, head straight there. And people were like, be careful, like it's dangerous, you need to watch your bag. Like it was met with a lot of caution, right? And I think part of that stigmatization, I think, lends itself to the history of Carbon as a coal depot, right? So these kinds of ideas of the area being an area of dirt, like just going there to just entering into the area because it was a coal depot, people would leave covered in soot, right? And we know, I think, the links between how we think about dirt, how we think about poverty, the links between poverty and crime, or at least depictions of that. So all of this was sort of enmeshed in this presentation of Carbon as a place that was dirty, dangerous, and very much a space of poverty within the city. I think, like, as the market has grown over the years, obviously there are additional issues connected with, I mean, I would argue that they're connected with the absence of public services, right? And infrastructure to cater to that very active and growing kind of market space, right? So not necessarily having appropriate waste disposal facilities, not having enough toilets, et cetera, and so forth, that again add to this mix of the area being dirty. So fast forward, we're going to speak about the redevelopment of the market. Now, the first, as far as I can trace it, take all of this with a grain of salt, because I'm going based on desk-based research. There might have been a previous development plan, but as far as I've been able to track it, the first known proposal to redevelop the market was actually from a market vendor themselves. Okay, so this was in like 2007, I gather. So this is it was a market vendor who was also a barangay councillor. The barangays is like, it's like a local authority, right? So he was president of a vendors cooperative and also a barangay councillor, and he put forward a proposal to the city to redevelop the market. Now, I think that wasn't picked up because, as far as I know, like nothing in particular happened with it. So fast forward again, okay, I'm going to take you now to September 2019, okay, where SM Supermarkets, and this is so SM, think back to that fancy mall that I showed you a picture of with SM on the kind of tall post. SM is a corporation that's run by one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest family in the Philippines. So they run malls and supermarkets and all that kind of stuff, right? Basically, SM Supermarkets put in an unsolicited proposal to the city, acting mayor at the time, Mayor Rebellion, to modernize Carbon market. Okay, and the proposal was to replace the existing kind of 3 market buildings with a single 3-story complex. Okay, and this was the idea, and the initial pitch was modeled against SM Market Mall in Dasmariñas in Cavite. Okay, so the mayor was in favor, thought this was a good idea. They did a field trip and they invited some vendors as well to go and see the market mall in Dasmariñas. On the back of that visit and in discussion with vendors that were operating in Cavite, there was quite a bit of kind of pushback against this plan from vendors who were really concerned about the impacts that shifting from kind of an open air market into like this market mall was likely going to have on their incomes. Okay, so there's resistance. Try to picture this. So the proposal goes out, have a visit. People are like, nah, they're not really into it. Then SM goes silent. Okay, so everything's just like dead in the water. Everything's quiet. Now, I don't know how long exactly later. I think, give or take, let's say a couple of months. Okay, a very similar proposal comes through. Okay, and this again is a proposal to redevelop the market, but this time it's not from it's not from SM. This is now from a construction company called the Megawatt Construction Corporation, who, interestingly, I gather, builds a lot of the malls for SM. Okay, so this proposal comes through very similarly, but they're quietly awarded the bid. Okay, and bear in mind that all of this is taking place, so the dates are like 2019, 2020, 2021. We're talking like the heart of the pandemic, and the Philippines was one of the worst countries in Southeast Asia impacted by the pandemic. And a really strict period of lockdown. So this bid is quietly awarded. And in January 2021, a joint venture agreement between the Cebu city government and Megawide Construction Company gets signed. Okay. And this is a joint venture agreement that relates to what is going to be a phased redevelopment of the market. Okay. Now, the joint venture agreement sets out plans for the commercialization and like I would definitely say the privatization of the wider carbon market area. Okay, transforming it, as you can see here, into like not just a market, but a business hub. Okay, it's a wider business center. This is quite a big area. You've got it kind of plugging into other things in the city. So you've got a lifestyle village with shops and restaurants. You have a facility that's going to connect you to airport check-in. So this is the water here in the airports, basically across that channel. A transportation hub, and it's also including kind of a Santo Nino Park and Chapel as so it's a hub. They're going to redevelop a much bigger area. This was very much pitched, at least initially, and when I arrived in Cebu in sort of 2022, post-pandemic, it was pitched as a heritage preservation project and like an economic revitalization endeavor, right? And the idea was that the vendors were going to be relocated into a 4-story complex, which is pictured here. Okay, and it included also the development of Puso Village. So this right here is Puso Village. And Puso Village was going to be the city's newest, and I quote, gastronomic and shopping destination, featuring homegrown favorites and well-loved food brands that showcase the heart and soul of Cebu. And this is clever, okay? This very much pays homage to Cebuano heritage, both in like the name and the design. So Puso is hanging rice, okay? That is this particular shape of it, and the naming of it is very, very particular to Cebu. And also to locate Puso Village across the street from Santo Nino replica, a 30-foot Santo Nino replica. Again, the Santo Nino, the Philippines is a highly Roman Catholic country. And the Santo Nino is, the saint, I guess you could say, of Cebu. It's a really important part of Cebuano identity and culture. So you can see how Cebuano heritage is being mobilized in this project, right? But it's also presented simultaneously as a solution to Carbon's problems in terms of infrastructure, sanitation, and the environment. And so the aim here is to revitalize Carbon's rich history and heritage and economic relevance towards a first world Cebu. And so I'm quoting directly from like the signs that I could see. And rather paradoxically, it seeks to transform the historic Carbon district into a modern urban destination. So for me, there's some interesting paradoxes there that we can unpack in due course, right? So as I said, this was all happening around the pandemic. Now, market vendors that I spoke to they were not properly consulted about the joint venture agreement or these plans, okay? So the first time that they actually heard about the redevelopment was actually via Facebook. The Philippines is also one of the most kind of Facebook active countries, I think, in the world. And so, yeah, they got this news. They found out about it through Facebook, through some discussions of the barangay councillors that they follow, and through news outlets. And so a few of them went off and did some more research, and they looked at the terms of the proposed public-private partnership to redevelop the area and realized very quickly that there were a lot of questions and problems connected with this so-called public-private partnership. So they took to the streets literally with megaphones to inform their fellow vendors what was going on and to let them know that this joint venture agreement had been passed. That moment really sparks what is now the birth of the Carbonhanong Alliancia. So Carbonhanong means like the people of Carbon, and the alliance of the people of Carbon, you could say. This is a network of vendors who are actively lobbying to this day to stop the privatization of the market. Now, I think it's really important to say they don't identify. These are not activists per se. They don't identify as activists. They're vendors, okay? And they are also not against modernization. They're very much in favor of and recognize the need for the market to be modernized. As I said originally, like the first proposals came from market vendors themselves who realized that they needed more infrastructure and an upgrade, right? But they are very much against the privatization of the market. And so on August 25th, 2021, they filed a petition to nullify the joint venture agreement and requested a temporary restraining order against the project's implementation. Okay. Now, in particular, their complaints were of the failure of the government and of Megawide to follow due process concerning public consultation prior to approving and signing the joint venture agreement. And also around the terms, as I said, of the joint venture agreement itself, right? And specifically, their concern to this day is about the fact that in the joint venture agreement, it says that Megawide, or the subsidiary of Megawide Cebu to World, interesting term, would be responsible for collecting and managing the rental fees from the vendors, as opposed to the city government. Okay. So I think you can see where these kind of ideas that it's being privatized, it has a lot of validity, right? Now, the day after this petition was filed, on August 26, 2021, the human rights lawyer, Rex Fernandez, who had been supporting Cabo Hanon in their case and filed it on their behalf, he was murdered in broad daylight. And from what I've read, it showed like the murder, the assassination showed signs of being very highly organized. And as far as I'm aware, no one has been arrested or held accountable. Okay. He is a human rights lawyer. Okay. So whether his murder was because of and linked to his work for Carbon, or whether it was more generally due to his work as a human rights lawyer, I don't know. Nonetheless, I leave that with you. Not long thereafter, okay, an injunction was also filed against the project, this time by the Cebu Port Authority, who claimed that these developments that were already taking shape, so at this moment, Puso Village is already being built, okay, and they claimed that actually this can't go ahead because the project is taking place on their land. So they're like, the city government doesn't own this land. We the Port Authority own this land. You can't build on our land. Like we loaned it to you to use, but this isn't your land. Okay. So anyway, so they file an injunction, and this like kind of halts operations and means like it disrupts what's going on, and it means that even though Puso Village is built and like ready to open, they actually can't open it. Okay. And they obviously like in the preparations for the big opening night, which was going to happen around Christmas, they had vendors that were already they had worked with vendors to say, okay, you've got a stall, and they made that agreement. Now those vendors had nowhere to go. Okay. These are not pre-existing vendors. I should note these are new vendors. Okay. So reading all of this together, I think you can start to see this kind of disruption or complication of a formal and informal binary, and of like the roles that various stakeholders involved in this are playing, right? So there's a disruption of the kind of licit and illicit, legal or illegal behaviors, where the vendors, many of whom would frame as informal actors, even though they do pay to be in the market, so it's like quasi-formal, right? But many would call them like informal actors who aren't paying to be there and don't have a right to be there. They're making claims against formal corporations to say that their behaviors are illegal and unlawful, right? And interestingly, they're using formal channels to challenge this illicit and unlawful behavior. So they're going through the judiciary to try to get justice, okay? So what happened? Well, as I mentioned, this was all happening during the pandemic, right? So altogether, like fast forward now to 2021, January 2021. I think the fact that because of the lockdown, there was a really strong kind of quarantine imposed in Cebu. So a lot of the market vendors weren't even able to operate in the market, which meant that there weren't a lot of people there when the group of vendors going around with megaphones were informing people. Okay, so hold all of this in mind. But basically, long and short of it is that vendors who had been selling goods in this area for generations were met with bulldozers with very little notice and told to dismantle their stalls, and that they were going to be moved from the area of Freedom Park and Warwick Barracks to these temporary interim buildings. Okay. Some groups of vendors were able to fend off demolition teams, as you can see here. I'll just put a plug in for Gabriela, it's a women's party. They mobilized a lot, over 80% of vendors operating in most public markets in the world, but certainly this is the case in the Philippines, are female. Gabriela mobilized and amongst other kind of groups managed to actually fend off the demolition police from ruining people's stalls. But the majority of people lost their stalls and were forcibly relocated to the interim buildings. Okay. This is a photograph here of Carbon Market before the demolitions. Okay, so that's a university over there. Freedom Park is right across the street from the university, and this whole area here is called Warwick Barracks. Okay, and here you can see some of the destruction caused. This was just in the first few days. This whole area has been demolished now. Okay, so now little plug for you, John. But I think, yeah, this kind of very violent dispossession of market vendors, coupled with perhaps serendipitous, but nonetheless notable murder of Attorney Rex, I think really speaks to the politics of bossism in the Philippines. And yes, I'm referring to your work here, John, where you speak of bossism as the prevalence of local power brokers who achieve sustained monopolistic control within given territorial jurisdictions and use their considerable discretionary power over zoning ordinances, construction contracts, and police forces for busting unions and clearing land of squatters to oil their political machines by serving as gatekeepers and facilitators of Manila-based and foreign investors. Now, for me, yes, I think this is just yet another example of bossism at play. So I just wanted to show you, this is what has come in the wake of the destruction of those long-standing stalls. So the idea was to develop a Singapore-styled food hawker center, okay? And now, because of everything happening with Puso Village and the Cebu Port Authority, like they needed to find somewhere for these higher-paying stall holders to move to. So they got rid of all the vendors that had been there for generations, moved them into these interim buildings, which I'll show you shortly, to make way for vendors that could afford to pay more to take over these stalls here. Okay, these stalls had really, really high rental fees. Okay, like exorbitantly high, which meant that even though theoretically the space was open to anyone, it totally priced out all the kind of all the original vendors that had been operating in the area. Okay. And what you end up seeing is actually the vendors basically being like fast food chains that you'd find in any mall. Okay, it's the same people that you find in Ayala and in the various SM malls. So it's interesting when you start to think about this as like a heritage conservation and preserving Cebuano identity when we've got this here instead. So yet another example of the conflicting rationalities that I think are becoming particularly apparent. Now, another kind of conflict here is this idea, one of the narratives used about Carbon is the fact that it was too dense, too crowded. We need to make it less densely populated here. So this is a quote from a friend, a journalist and advocate of the vendors. And he said, in a conversation with the city, he said, I said to the city, by your own admission, Carbon Market is overcrowded. So how come you're reducing its size? How come instead of having 5 buildings, you're only going to build 2? And they compensate for it by having a 3rd floor. But who goes to the 3rd floor to buy? That's a mall already. And their official publications say they're creating a world-class mall. So the costs and the impacts of these demolitions are huge, okay? Now, regardless of the size of people's original stalls, and you saw the photograph of Freedom Park and Warwick Barracks, some of them are massive, right? People are given 2 by 2 meter spaces in the interim building, often on second and third floors, super far away from regular footfall. And they complain that many of their customers haven't been able to find them even years after they've been moved. Okay, and this had a huge impact on people's incomes, and caused a massive amount of stress. And this just goes. So what a lot of people are doing is they're using the stalls they've been given as like a storage space, and they're going back out onto the street to vend where there are actually people, right? And this just kind of speaks to some of the costs, okay? And the big concern that residents have already, their income's been hugely disrupted. But then when you take the joint venture agreement, which not only says that Megawide and not the city are going to be the ones managing and collecting fees for the market, but also that they have the right to increase the fees that market vendors need to pay, including market vendors come in with bañeras or like baskets full of their goods. And so you can see here that the amount that they're potentially going to have to pay per bañera is exorbitantly high. Not to mention the cost of a stall. So there's multiple costs that are going to now come into the right to vend in Carbon. Now, I think all of this really speaks to and reveals things that I was already seeing when I was doing my PhD. And this is about the kind of intimate links of these urban development narratives and these projects to worlding logics of the neoliberal city, right? And you see this not just in the naming of the subsidiary of Megawide as Cebu to World, which made me smile. But also in the aesthetic mode of governmentality that's explicitly articulated by project partners and by government workers. And this includes a representative that I spoke with from the Cebu City Market Authority, who said, when the city is aiming for a Singapore-like city, everything should be pleasing to the eyes, especially to the tourists. Everything should be nice and clean and orderly. A Singapore-like city, it's actually a modernized city. We have the bus rapid transit system, the LRT, the trains, we have airports, bridges. But on the attitude side, people should be disciplined, cleaned, and orderly. So this kind of preoccupation with order is not unique in any way to the Philippines, but I think is very common in countries that have kind of a colonial legacy. I'm doing work in East Africa right now. A lot of the same narratives prevail. I know this also exists in Indonesia and in Vietnam. So just kind of some links to the ways in which this kind of post-colonial ideas are kind of embedded in post-colonial states and policies. So just a link and a shout out to Hoyan Tran's work in Hanoi, and Eric Harm's work writing on Ho Chi Minh City, again in Vietnam, where he's noting kind of beautification objectives being used to legitimize the spatial cleansing of urban populations, right? And I think I wanted to share this in terms of just thinking about the post-colonial state. I couldn't help but reflect on these colonial legacies and specifically in the site of Carbon, okay? And namely the Warwick Barracks, which was the main site of demolition, right? And this is here I'm citing from a think piece, an online think piece written by Marjus Destinado and Jen Nicole Jacquot, who reflect on the colonial legacies tied to Carbon and specifically to Warwick Barracks. Now, Warwick Barracks, that area that was demolished, was established in 1899 during the American occupation, and it was established to house American troops during the Philippine-American War. And these two authors state, the first colonization of the barracks came in 1899 with American occupation, redefining land, labor, and life through force and policy. The second came in 2022, not with soldiers, but with permits and demolition notices. Both dispossessions claimed to bring order. Both justified removal in the name of improvement, and both were rooted in the same colonial logic. Empty the space, overwrite its story, and replace survival with profit. Okay? I think they articulated things that I was thinking about really, really beautifully. So yeah, a shout out to them for pulling that together so beautifully. And this is the barracks now. So again, just to give you an idea of the aesthetics that are being produced and maintained, very material reshaping of the city from the photographs that I showed you before. So all kind of ambulant vendors now cannot be on the street unless they have a red tent. As I said, it's like a kind of 4x4 tent. They have to pay to rent that tent or buy the tent from the city. So you really see what's being produced, this kind of image of order. Okay. Now, I'm drawing this to a close and I'm running slightly over time. Vendors have a slightly different idea of what a Singapore-like city is. And I thought that this was really interesting when I was going back through my kind of interview transcripts. And for them, a Singapore-like city is not based around aesthetics, okay? But for them, and a number of people said this, I'm going to share 2 quotes with you. For them, a Singapore-like city was actually about good governance, basic welfare, and accountability. And I'm going to share 2 quotes here. So one female market vendor said, for you to be able to achieve a Singapore-like Cebu city, Cebu city, leaders should think like leaders of Singapore. First, government should not be corrupt. And second, we should address really the root cause of poverty. And then you practice good governance. Because what did they do to cut a bot? There was no consultation. It's really bad governance, you know? There's people participation. They don't let us participate. So you can see this, like, whether it's accurate or not depiction of governance in Singapore, like the point is you see a different kind of imaginary being pitched as to like what a Singapore-like Cebu might mean, right? And here again, another quote, which again highlights kind of very similar themes. So this vendor that I spoke to said, this government's really a joke. Instead of helping people in the poor places or in poverty, what they're doing is making us suffer. You want to copy Singapore? Why are you not copying the minimum wage in Singapore? Why are you not copying the good things in Singapore? The mayor is copying only the place, but not the policy. If you want to improve a place, you should know what the problem is. You should know how to solve it. And you should know how to give people what they are asking for. Okay. And I really think that this starts to speak to some of those tensions that I mentioned in my introduction that are inherent to the socio-spatial imaginary of a Singapore-like Cebu, right? And for me, it starts to indicate, maybe it's me and my hope and optimism, but I feel like there's like a crack that emerges in the thinking about the Singapore Cebu. There's some kind of a crack in the current political moment that becomes apparent, right? So where things stand right now, these are the kinds of ongoing acts of resistance, as I see it, which again are really part of like the crack itself, but also of sustaining and hopefully widening the crack, right? As I mentioned at the beginning, Hadbohanong are taking to the streets, they organize rallies, they have collective action, and they do a lot of information sharing for different vendors. The vendor group is super diverse, right? And there's so many different cooperatives and personal and political interests implicated there. So the main thing for Hadbohanong is that they go out and let people know the terms of the joint venture agreement that they think are problematic, and let people know also when there are activities happening or consultations taking place. And these are ongoing all the time. The case that they filed against the city and against Megawide is ongoing. Okay, and again, the specificities of that legal case are challenging the unlawful practices of the city and of Megawide in terms of how that joint venture agreement came about. So as far as Hadbohanong are concerned, the whole, like the essence of the JVA is null and void. It's unlawful because they didn't follow due process. Okay, not to mention the unlawful demolitions. Again, there's like legal code to say the way the demolition should take place, the kinds of processes that need to be there. None of that happened the way that it should have. So that's ongoing, and as is often the case, like it's been ongoing for years. I think the strategy of the corporations is really to like tie this up in the courts, just not showing up or like dragging things out, hoping to kind of bankrupt their opponents. But for now, the case is ongoing. Another act of resistance that I see is this like ambulant vendors staying put, like leaving those market stalls that they've been given upstairs like empty, or using it as a storage space, and actually, going back to the streets, like reclaiming the right to the streets, the right to space, the right to livelihoods, the right to be visible. And for me, I think that that's a really, really important act of resistance that's ongoing. Okay. So where things stand, a little update. It's changing literally daily. The Cebu Port Authority and Magawide appear to have come to some kind of an agreement that has enabled Puso Village to open after a 3-year delay. And again, I put this here because I love the chronicler of Cebu's progress. So again, you can see there are many different ideas and interests around what progress looks like in it. Okay, interesting too that it's called Skyscraper City. So you can take this where you want. But they were delighted that Puso Village was now opening. You've also got a really exciting development that happened earlier this year, actually. So a different city where SM had put in a bid to develop the public market, that's Baguio City, their vendors managed to successfully push back. They voiced a lot of concerns, very similar to everything happening in Carbon, and they managed to scare off SM. SM has withdrawn their proposal to redevelop the market. And I think that's huge. Like, that's really, really exciting. The other thing that's an exciting moment for me is the fact that Cebu City has a new mayor, Mayor Nestor Archival. He's not a usual suspect in the kind of Cebuano or Filipino kind of political scene. And at the time of the public hearings and like prior to the recent elections, he was one of the few city councillors that stood with the vendors and that, you know, really critically interrogated the joint venture agreement. So for me, again, there's a crack. There's a crack that exists that is exciting and has potential. So on to my last slide, and just to draw this to a close. For me, the story of Carbon really opens and offers a window into understanding what are very complicated and often contradictory logics and dynamics that shape the political economy of contemporary urbanism in the Philippines. And while in many ways, I think it can very much be read as yet another example of the commodification of the city that's being operationalized through market-oriented ideals of profit maximization and efficiency through privatization, which are based on logics that legitimize and privilege aesthetic governance and like entrepreneurial urbanism and the disciplining of citizens so that you can kind of enable elite families, elite corporations to consolidate their land holdings and market power. It also speaks to a moment of rupture, right? And there is a crack. There's some kind of a crack that's taking place here. And I'm very hopeful that this crack in the hegemonic structures that kind of dominate the state and the market and that prioritize private interests over and profit over kind of public interest and the needs of people. I feel like, I don't know, I feel like there's a simmering possibility for change. And I feel like this is also connected. There were recent protests taking place across the country connected with corruption scandal linked to flood control projects and the pillaging of disaster relief funds. Like, another kind of people's power mobilization is taking place, spearheaded by young people, as it's happening in many parts of the world right now, saying these systems aren't working for us anymore. And so I'm leaving it there. When I say this is a live case, yesterday, as I was like switching off my computer, they had a meeting in City Hall to review the joint venture agreement, and many of the vendors were upset because they were invited to come to City Hall, but they weren't allowed in the room. So like, it's every single day there's a new update with what's going on. But I hope you found the story interesting, and I'd love to hear how it connects or resonates with cities that you're familiar with, perhaps in Southeast Asia, perhaps elsewhere. But yeah, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Any questions?
We'll start there, and then yeah.
Thanks so much for your presentation. I guess my question is about literature review and kind of the bigger story that you're situating this. And I think this is maybe an alternative read about the crack. And I think the central argument of Anarchy of Families is the Philippine condition is corruption. It is so deep into the Philippine state that to overread what is an example where the Philippine state was pro-Tao, right? right? Pro-people. Even people's power is anarchy of families. And so that's kind of, that's all of the contributors who've done Philippine corruption and Philippine democracy literature would say, this is a moment, not a movement.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, where are you situating this literature? Because it is a crack, but then can the crack go back into
very likely
ongoing story of Philippine life?
Yeah.
And so the other literatures that I think, so like certainly Singapore is one literature that you can compare, but I think the more appropriate is Bali.
Okay.
So there's a lot of literature. I think Jordana has a book about the development of Denpasar and Seminyak. So in the 90s, when Bali was having this exact same conversation about redevelopment of historic markets, or Bali is a global tourism destination, it's a beach destination, it needed malls. And it's interesting because Bali is a very Hindu, very different kind of nationalism, let's say, than other parts of Indonesia. And so, but there's a lot more protest and contestation about public imagination of who Bali should be for, not literature, than Singapore, where it's very muted what resistance looks like in Singapore for Singaporean reasons. And so, there is literature about Singaporean development, but the protest culture and the people power culture, if that's kind of the lens you're looking at, Bali probably has more of a one-to-one comparison. The last literature I thought, there's emerging literature about Bonifacio global city in Metro Manila, which I think it was Warwick Barracks you were talking about.
Yeah.
These global cities are built off of former American colonial institutions. So BDC in Metro Manila is a very one-to-one example of what Cebu is kind of doing.
Yeah.
But also there's parallel literature about that the barangays around BGC area and Greater Taguig area had protest moments in the 90s and 2000s. But then again, these were cracks, and BGC right now is all skyscrapers. And where are the protesters from the 2000s?
No, thank you for that, and please don't run off because I want to pick your brain after the session in more depth. To answer your question about my literature space, so I'm a geographer, and I think where I've located a lot of this has been in the space of urban geography, kind of concepts and ideas connected with like the work of Ai Waong, of Asher Gertner, thinking about aesthetic governance, thinking about like the ways in which neoliberal logics are kind of shaping efforts to govern citizens. And again, a lot of the literature on informality. Now, where I've been struggling and why this is like the first time really that I'm like presenting on this in depth over 2 years is because for precisely those reasons, like it's just another retelling of the same story, right? Is it a movement? No, I would say it's a moment, absolutely. But I feel like, and again, it could just be hope on my end, but I feel like that there is potentially a simmering shift in consciousness and potentially finding cracks in the existing system of corruption and of like elite families, like leading everything. Is it going to shift everything in the Philippines? Absolutely not. Is this kind of joint venture agreement probably going to go ahead in some shape? I think it will. But I feel like in terms of my questions here, alternative ways of city making or like a future way, the power structures, those hegemonies exist, and I don't think they're going anywhere. But I feel like the future, not just for the Philippines, but for the world at large, where it's like the people against the corporation, actually that kind of tussle produces something slightly different that maybe isn't just about profit, but brings in a more moral kind of compass and space. And so I feel like at the moment in Cebu in particular, and they're modeling so much about a carbon market and the redevelopment of Cebu around BTC in Manila. So you're spot on in terms of that story. But perhaps it won't play out exactly the same. And I do look to cases like Baguio as an opportunity for hope to understand, okay, well, I feel like Cebu we're unlucky because of the timing with the market redevelopment coinciding with the pandemic, coinciding also with Typhoon Odette that hit in December. Like, I think there were so many disruptions that almost enabled, like, to think of the, Naomi Klein's like shock doctrine that just enabled this to pass through. But they're definitely doing what they can to reshape and contest what it eventually looks like. So thank you so much for those comments, and please don't leave quickly when we finish.
Yeah, thank you so much for the presentation. I had a question that kind of came into my mind when you showed the big SM mall building and the kind of environment it is situated or bordered by, neighbored by. It kind of reminded me of I mean, I'm also not very I don't really know much about Cebu. I'm very much focused on Manila. I've only ever been to Manila. I've never been to Cebu. But it also reminded me of a mall in South Korea in Seoul, which is the Times Square in southern Seoul, which when I first went there in 2019, it was very like luxurious. It was, targeted towards like the upper middle class, lower like upper class. And when I came back last year, I noticed that the surroundings of the mall were vastly impoverished. A lot of old people, old people with little incomes, a lot of poverty. And the mall also kind of was not the high-end mall it used to be, but has kind of settled down to more, shops like, I don't know, Uniqlo or something. So I was wondering, also in the Philippines, also in Cebu, especially in Cebu, because I don't know that much about it, how sustainable are such malls? Like, what is their future? Like right now, it feels like they're targeted towards a more like better income, like audiences or customers.
Yeah.
But realistically seeing, how sustainable are they?
That is
what is
the
the longevity of those malls?
Yeah, the reality is going to be VTC. Like we're heading in that direction. So that whole strip of like the entire waterfront of Cebu City, spanning all the way up to Talisay, which is another like a part of Metro Cebu, and over to Mandawi. Like that whole area is now the South Road Reclamation property. There are huge efforts underway. Other dimension of my research looking at efforts to relocate formal settlers that are living along the waterway into medium-rise buildings in the South Road property area. So like the entire area is being reimagined, okay? And I was at a waterfront development summit, so I got a good sense of their plans, very kind of very interesting, like a lot of watercolor, a lot of digital manipulation of what the city could look like, rebuilding a city hall, which looks a lot like the White House, like some really interesting stuff going on there. How realistic that is given the current reality, it waits to be seen. And this is where like you can have these objectives and ideas. And I think there are parts of the South Road reclamation area that have like, you've got fancy casinos, you've got really high-end malls going up there. The idea that's coming from Talisay side, and it's coming, you know what I mean? SMC side kind of stretches into that way. So from SMC side heading further to Talisay, it gets more and more high end. So I think they're now coming into the kind of heart of Cebu, which houses the most densely populated informal settlements that have been there for a very, very long time. But that's tied in with the housing question, right? And as with everything, like money is an issue. And this is where like back to the question of cracks and moments, like Cebu doesn't have the money that Singapore has, or the financial kind of instruments and structures to operate social housing the way that Singapore does, or deal with like welfare the way that Singapore does, right? Like that, it's a completely different system. But the need for public-private partnerships is real, not just in the Philippines, but everywhere. Like governments are broke, right? So who has money? It's private corporations. And this is where I do think that like there is a potential to reshape those social contracts, right? Between the citizen, the state, and the corporation. And I feel like it's an interesting case to track. Like how far can they get to kind of push for a more moral socially oriented grounds in how they redevelop a public market, right? But to answer your question, I think that SM, they're building a stadium, maybe it's already built next to it. Like the waterfront is changing. The question is how they're going to I think Carbon is just one part of that. There's a settlement on the other side of Carbon Market that, there are very active discussions, obviously, about what you're going to do with that population of several thousand people that are living in Sitio Bato, bordering Carbon Market. So housing is a really big question that comes into play. Yeah, John.
Two questions, one sort of from below, the other from above. First question is, it'd be interesting to hear from you a bit more about the way in which Carbon Market in its heyday, or in its more recent heyday, operated. There was the quote you read from that online two authors comment about not profit but survival, this kind of moral economy logic, the sort of having a suki, having these sorts of things. I remember the book, in the only available book to study Cebuano in the first lesson, the person goes to the market and is told, oh, there's a special price for you because you're American. And then at the end of the book, you get to the end of the book, and then the person says, why the hell are you charging me twice what you're charging everyone else? And then the vendor says, well, a special price for you, you're American. In other words, you pay double.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about that. And then the other thing that I was really struck by is the absence of local capital from the story. It's like, SM, Schumart, the C family, who also own or control one of the biggest banks in the country. They are the single biggest retail outfit in the country. But once upon a time, as recently as the 1990s, there were the Gaisanos. There are also the Gokongways, Robinsons, Galleria. There were local small malls. And so, that transition from, butchers and markets to supermarkets and then shopping malls, that's standard. But you'd think that there would be a place in this story for local capital. What's amazing is the Ayalas, the Cs, Megawide, they also got the contract for Mactan Cebu International Airport, the Parañaque, the big bus terminal. Like they operate on scale and with international, I think, Indian partners. Yeah. But there's once upon a time, Cebu had serious capital. They had the Inter-Island Shipping Cartel. They had major agri-processing outfits. And that level of Cebu-based capital, it's just gone. And in national politics, the Osmeñas are gone. And these players, the Ramas, the Garcias, they're just Cebu. They have no visibility on the national level. They're nobodies in Manila. Yeah. And so it's amazing how Manila-based and international capital has colonized Cebu and marginalized local intermediaries. So in that context, the Cebu Port Authority, I was curious about that. Like, if they're making trouble belatedly, who are they? Is that the residual power of, the shipping folks? Is it the TUCP, this Cebu-based, the single largest labor federation in the country, really has its origins in Cebu's port, deeply corrupt union, the Associated Labor Union that used to control the stevedoring. Like, is there some sort of residual resistance from what remains of local capital, or are they just vaporized by the steamroller effect of Ayala level, C family level capital?
So really interesting questions. If I've forgotten the first, because I don't know, I didn't come prepared with a pen, but
just moral economy of the marketplace in its heyday.
So I don't know a lot about that, because I think I plugged in very much in a current moment, but from what I've gathered from interviews and discussions with people, so people had to pay a bayad, a small amount every day, and that was ongoing even when I was meeting with people. You pay 20 pesos or 50 pesos every day to operate. So there's a degree of formality. The Cebu City Market Authority comes and collects that. In terms of how market vendors operate. They're organized around cooperatives, normally based on the kinds of goods that they're selling. So there were a whole bunch of different, I think there's like 7 or 8 co-ops that are really big that represent different vendors. Now, the co-ops don't all have the same interests. Various co-ops have been in favor of the development of the market. There's a lot of questions. I need to be careful about allegations and what I say here, but there's mixed interests that overlap with private interests and personal interests that pervade a lot of these cooperatives that have come out of the woodwork over the past couple of years. Okay, but I think in terms of how the market was governed, it was governed through the market authority, working with people to pay their kind of bits and pieces. People had stalls that were long established, and I'm gathering that they paid fees to operate those stalls, again, on a monthly basis to the city market authority. And then you had co-ops dealing with the kind of everyday management, more on like on a more intimate level. To your point about the Port Authority, so that's a really, really interesting question. I don't know very much about the Port Authority, but you've highlighted something really interesting that I'm going to look into a bit more there in terms of who owns it and the kinds of, yeah, the interests, the family interests that are kind of held at the Port Authority level. So I don't know much about that as it stands, but in terms of the steamroller effect, certainly just as someone who visits Cebu annually, let's say, it's very much that. It's very Manila based, like the Ayalas, the SMs, like Robinson Gallery is still there. The Gaisano, like malls and supermarkets, they're there, but they're definitely like more run down, and there doesn't seem to be much money kind of plugging in to increase their kind of hold in the city, or certainly not to play to the Singapore-like aesthetic. So they seem quite quiet just from like a visual aesthetic and my engagement with the city and how those spaces have been changing. All of the new developments, so several of the areas that I worked in for my PhD were at risk of demolition in the name of disaster risk management, but very interestingly, at least in 2 of them, you know, you're replacing this with condominiums, etc. So, which are Ayala land developments, right? And this is back to your point about like how much is the crack able to do something? Not much. I'm not kidding myself. At the Waterfront Development Summit, like the Ayalas were the Ayala Corporation, Ayala Land, building kind of fancy new gated communities and high-rise condos. Like they were there very prominently. So are very deeply implicated in the waterfront development of the Metro Cebu area. Menyes, I mean, he's vice mayor right now, and he's standing firmly. He's very firmly behind the market vendors. He's actually filed a case Supreme Court to try to get the JBA pulled. But yeah, like it is exactly as you're saying. Like there's I feel like the Cebu and the kind of powers that might have been in Cebu are definitely not at the forefront of this very highly profitable and lucrative redevelopment that's taking place. Not that I'm aware of anyways. Maybe through the Port Authority, but now the Port Authority have cut a deal, right? So like they're happy with Puso Village. So something's happened there to where they're getting their piece of the pie. So it's going ahead. But I'll look into that. Petra, did you have a question as well?
Run out of
We've run out of
time,
time.
so again, we can.
Yeah, we can talk later. Okay.
We have run out of time, past our sell-by date. Many thanks to Jordana for a super interesting talk, and it sounds like a really brilliant research project. So looking forward to seeing.